But we want to welcome Paul Mancano from Masson All Access. He's been covering the minor leagues on a regular basis. And we're going to talk a little bit about a synopsis of what you've been seeing. Let's go to Del Marvin. Tell us a little bit about the pitching strength Del Marvin Shorebirds.
Yeah, I mean, it's been carrying them all season long, and they've been winning to the tune of that. They started out the season, everybody knows, on fire, and they've kept it going in the second half. Everybody knows that the pitching depth up near the top of the organization is not quite as strong, but it's made up for with the lower levels of the organization. Guys like Grayson Rodriguez, D.L. Hall, who's now up to High A Frederick. There is so much pitching depth at the lower levels of the organization that is just waiting to get moved on up, and we're seeing it already, and it's turning into wins.
I had a scout tell me that he thought that Grayson Rodriguez eventually would be a #1 pitcher in the big leagues. Your thoughts on what you've seen from Grayson Rodriguez?
He's been outstanding, definitely deserving, and he hasn't gotten the call up yet mid-season. I think they just want to make sure that he can sustain his success where he's at, but we've seen it from him. We've seen it from guys like D.L. Hall, who has the potential to be a #1 starter. There's a lot of talent and pitching talent in this organization.
And we move from Del Marvin. We'll go up to Bowie for a moment. Let's talk a little bit about that second half record for the Bowie Bay Sox. Absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, pretty much every level of the organization was winning in the first half, except for Bowie. People were kind of wondering why. They were 8 games below 500 in the first half, but they've made up for it in the second half. They've been outstanding. The pitching has always been there for Bowie. They've gone with the 6-man rotation. That has worked very well, but it's the hitting that has really helped them over the past few weeks. It's really the lower levels of the organization. The hitting is starting to work its way up. They've got Mason McCoy there now, I think he's a professional hitter. They've got several guys in that lineup now that can hit home runs. They're second in the Eastern League in terms of team ERA, first in terms of whip, so the pitching is not a problem. And now that they have the hitters to back them up, they're really starting to win some games.
And speaking of the hitters, Yusniel Diaz obviously is at Bowie right now, came over in the Manny Machado trade. Let's talk a little bit about, when he's been able to play. It seems like he's been putting up some numbers, but he's had a lot of inactivity, right, because of injuries.
Yeah, he has, unfortunately. But when we went down to visit them, at that time, he was struggling. He was hitting about 220, only had 1 homer at that point. Since then, we saw him work with some of the coaches. We talked to some of the guys there. They said that he's really working with the coaches. And he hit a home run that night, had 2 hits. And since then, he's hitting 287 with 9 homers. He's really starting to turn it around. If he can stay healthy, he's slowly putting it all together and looking like the prospect that he was when he came over in the Manny Machado trade.
Sounds like you're having fun covering these teams. Let's work our way to Frederick now. How about D.L. Hall now? He's been elevated up a little bit recently, right?
He has. He's been great. And we saw him in the Futures game. He really doesn't worry too much about where people rank him outside the organization. He said those are just people behind computers. They're not getting down to the game, seeing what you have in your arsenal. He doesn't worry about where these people rank him. He's just going out there and pitching. He's been struggled a little bit to start the season, which might be expected. It's his first season in Frederick. But since then, he's got a sub-250 ERA since mid-May. He's been on fire. And he's a tough kid, too. We saw he got hit by a comebacker in that Futures game, stayed in the game. He's a smart kid, still very young, doesn't turn 21 until November, but he's got a bright future ahead.
One more thing about Hall. How about the strikeout total? It seems like he's striking out a lot of batters.
Yeah, he has really developed his changeup this year. That's been a big thing for him. He said that there's, obviously his fastball has always been there. He can touch the upper 90s. He hit 98 in the Futures game, but it's the changeup that is really starting to get hitters out. He now has a difference of over 10 miles per hour between his fastball and his changeup. When you have that kind of difference between your velocities, you can really fool some hitters, especially at that level.
Well, how about some of the unheralded players that aren't getting a lot of notice but are doing a decent job?
Yeah, Mason McCoy was one guy that we talked to. We talked to Alex Rom, rather. He's been great as well, or Drew Rom, rather. There are so many guys within this organization that you might not think of, and you might not see them in the top 30 of a prospect list, but they're guys that fill out of the minor league teams in certain organizations. And we might remember that Trey Mancini obviously was not a very heralded prospect when he came up to the Orioles, but he hit at every level. There are so many guys in this organization that have been picked up, might have flown under the radar, but have started to work their way up to the upper levels of the organization just by the fact that they're producing. And I think we're going to see some of them maybe in September and a few to start 2020.
I just want to say this man does a very nice job when his work. Paul Mancano, young man on the rise here at Masson.